Hi, this is Jonathan Lampe with File Transfer Consulting with another System Integration Spotlight. Today we're looking at Serv-U and FTP Voyager, and we're going to quickly build an integrated application that will securely collect, parse, DB import, and archive transaction files from multiple locations. But first, a quick word about File Transfer Consulting. We are North America's first and only consulting firm completely focused on file transfer issues. As an independent firm, we have the flexibility to look beyond the technology into your core business needs. We also have the reach and experience to develop a comprehensive transmission strategy and address any gaps in training, personnel, operations, or integration in your file transfer operations. Today's presentation will begin with a business case around improving visibility into business statistics while controlling costs. From there, we'll move on to identifying available and necessary resources, developing a workflow, implementing the workflow using available resources, and then running the workflow and viewing the final statistics. The business case we'll look at today involves a fictitious company that owns 10 gas stations. And quite simply, we're going to improve visibility and control costs. So let's take a look at our fictitious company, here called Rhino Gas. This is a company that's enjoyed solid growth, now up to 10 gas stations and about 100 gas pumps under management. They already have station-specific software, but they're starting to outgrow it. They've talked to their software vendor. The software vendor would like $25,000 for a centralized reporting engine. The opportunity here for Rhino Gas is to use existing software. First, the pump software that generates transaction logs today, and then we're going to take a look at some existing database and reporting software that's already present at Rhino Gas headquarters. All in all, we're hoping to add some secure FTP software and a little bit of customization to develop that visibility solution for less than $10,000. And there's the key return on investment here. We would be providing, at under $10,000, a savings of at least $15,000 off the commercial vendor's $25,000 price tag. So the next thing we need to do is establish which resources we have and which we need. The resources we already have are the transaction logs that are already being generated from each pump at each station. We also already have a database and reporting engine at headquarters. To fill the gap, we need a transport mechanism to send the transaction files to headquarters. We also need an ETL process, that's extract, transform, and load, to extract data from the transform files, perform a minor transformation on the raw data from the transaction files, and load all of them into the database. Now we can take a look at the workflow. We're going to carry over from the last slide the high-level workflow, where we took the transaction logs, moved them across a transport, used an ETL process to move them into the database. But we're simplifying here. We're hiding the pumps, and we're hiding the reporting engine at the end. Now we can flesh out the workflow with technology. First, we'll add a scheduled FTP client to send the transaction logs to headquarters. We'll also add an FTP server to receive the transaction logs and to initiate the ETL process. On the FTP server, we'll plan on using folder events to initiate some sort of script that'll initiate ETL, and that script will perform ETL and archive any of the incoming transaction logs. The technology vendor I've selected here is Rhinosoft.com. Rhinosoft's Serv-U software was completely rebuilt in 2008 and has enjoyed tens of thousands of successful deployments since. It's future-proof technology. It already supports IPv6, already supports many languages including Chinese, and includes authentication technology such as Active Directory authentication. It has built-in support for FTP, SFTP, and optional HTTP support. It provides a great web transfer interface for end users, even on mobile devices, and it also provides the critical capability we need for this application, which is a trigger on upload, download, and many other events. On the other side, I've chosen to use Rhinosoft's FTP Voyager as my FTP client. This is a rich FTP client which has likewise been tested and deployed in hundreds of thousands of desktops around the world. Again, it has built-in support for FTP and SFTP, and it allows a silent installation, which allows system integrators and IT professionals to pre-configure the client. FTP Voyager also has a scheduler that runs as a true service, which is great because it does not depend on Microsoft schedulers or scripts of any kind. Now that we've selected the technology vendor, we can put the specific product back into our workflow. Here, we're going to use FTP Voyager to send the transaction logs on a regular schedule, and use Serv-U to receive the transaction logs and initiate the ETL process. Next, we're going to leave our presentation behind and take a look at the actual steps we need to undertake to implement this workflow using Serv-U and FTP Voyager. The first thing that we want to do is take a look at our existing resources as they actually appear on the computer. To start, we're going to take a look at the station records. Let's go into Station 1's records here. Take a look at records from Pump 1 on September 15th, 2011. What we see here is a standard fixed length file. We have the station number in column 1, a pump number following that, the date, the time of the transaction, the type of fuel used, the unit price of the fuel, how many gallons were consumed, and the total price assessed for each transaction. Transactions come in as the day goes on, from 4 o'clock in the morning to approximately 11 or midnight. We're going to take a variety of these files, and they all have the same format, with different data in them, of course, and compile those and ship those to the main headquarters for use in the ETL process. So the second resource we want to take a look at is the database into which the ETL will put its data. I'm just going to sign on to our local database here. I'm just happen to be using H2 here. That data that we just saw on the flat file is going to end up in a database called fuelings. As you can see here, station ID, pump ID, fuel time, type, price per gallon, gallons, and charge. All of those fields correspond to the fields we just saw in the fixed length text records. Just to show that we aren't doing anything unusual here, I'm going to do a quick query here to make sure that the database is empty. Run that. It's an empty database. Great. We'll come back to that shortly. As part of our process, we're going to use an intermediate set of files, which we're roughly going to call the inbound station data. That's where the files will receive when the Serv-U server immediately accepts them. And then we're also going to use a final resting place called the archive station data. And so quickly, we're going to take a look at a folder structure in here. Again, station send 001, nothing in there. We haven't sent any data in. Also take a quick look at the archive station data. We do have some older entries here from previous tests. I'm going to wipe out all 11 of those files now so that we have a clean slate for what we are about to do. We have 10 stations, so we're going to plan to create 10 different users in the Serv-U management tool. Before we got started today, I set up 8 of the users out here, and so to create the others, Serv-U allows you to copy existing users, which is exactly what I'm going to do with the 8th station out there. Change station 8 to 9. I'm going to pick a different home directory. I'm going to change the directory access. Save all that information, and then I have a 9th user. One of the nice things about this user interface is that you can go even faster if you don't mind editing paths by hand. So to create the 10th user, just change the 9 to a 10. And directory access, the same thing. Hit save on all those operations. And now we have 10 users in the system. To get back to the main navigation screen in Serv-U, you can either use the home or you can use navigation. And now that we have 10 users set up for our 10 stations, we have the folder structure to receive the inbound files and archive files. The next thing we are going to do is take a look at what an event looks like to kick off the ETL process. We're going to find those underneath domain, which is right here. And again, we see an existing event there. We're going to pull up and take a look at what that is. The name of the event is anything you want. So here I put down process incoming gas station transactions. The type of event we're going to fire on is an uploaded file. Somebody's going to send us a file in from the FTP Voyager client. It's going to hit Serv-U, and this event will fire. When we bring this in, we're going to execute this particular command. It's a batch file, as you see here, the import gas trans to db.bat, and we're able, through the use of macros in Serv-U, to provide the name of the person who uploaded the file, the full local path name, and just the file name to this particular batch file. So let's take a look at what's going on inside the batch file itself. This is the batch file that brings in. As you can see, the three variables get logged to user, path, and file. We're logging everything that we're doing out to a log file called import gas transaction to database.log. First, we're going to call another batch file here called perform ETL, which actually performs the ETL operation. Then we zip the file and we move it to the archive file. So now let's take a quick look at the perform ETL batch file. That uses a Java class loader called simple ETL for JBDC or JDBC. Essentially what this does is it performs a simple ETL operation using the very common JDBC database driver, which is similar to ODBC if you're familiar with that from Windows. It's using the data file that we were just given through Serv-U. It's using this map file to map text fields into database fields, and then it uses this file for database configuration parameters. And just to dig in a little bit more, let's take a quick look at the map file. Map file just says ignore fields that begin with comments, ignore a couple of other fields that don't really mean anything for our uses, and then it does a fixed length text file mapping here. Figures out how this database field, such as price per gallon, maps into the field that we have here. For example, look on field 41, go to field 45, and you'll find the price per gallon, which is listed in the flat file as unit price. The next thing we're going to do, now that we know what those batch files do, let's close that down, go back and take a look at our event again. Again, this event will fire off those batch file with these parameters, and that'll execute the entire ETL process, the zip process, and finally the move over to archive. Serv-U allows you to be fairly specific with the filters that you fire on. So one of the things that we're doing with this is we're using a event filter to make sure that we are only firing on valid transaction logs. So we can do a quick check against the file name. We could do a check against more parameters of the file, basically to make sure that the files that we're firing off in these events really match the criteria. And the last thing we're going to take a look at the event here is that we've decided to add a completion time of 5 seconds on this particular event. That'll allow all the ETL operations to clear and allow each one of the files to be processed sequentially rather than bunching up at all. Now the next thing that we're going to do is fire up FTP Voyager and see what we've configured over there.